Hello, my name is Emily Burlinghaus, and I am the Director of Policy and Research at Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy. Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy, or CICE, is a network of over 1,300 chambers of commerce and economic development organizations that works to advance the clean energy economy. We focus on promoting clean energy policy and programs that advance competitive markets, reduce costs for consumers, and maintain the security and reliability of energy supply. Founded and led by former chamber executives, CICE works with both large and small chambers and associations throughout the United States, across red and blue states and urban and rural communities. Today, we look forward to hosting a panel of experts for a discussion on domestic investment in the supply chain for electric vehicles and how businesses and communities can benefit from these investments, and the massive federal and state funding opportunities available to businesses, organizations, and communities for building out the EV supply chain. As I'm sure everyone in the audience is aware, the last few years have seen a flurry of announcements from legacy automakers, as well as startups in the EV manufacturing space. Whether investments in gigafactories for EV battery production, joint ventures between automakers and battery cell manufacturers, or other innovations along the supply chain, like suppliers responsible for components adjusting their processes and business models to adapt to the transition to EVs. There are about 30 EV battery factories either planned, under construction, or operating in the United States. To name just a few, BMW has partnered with battery maker AESC on a 30 gigawatt-hour battery cell factory in South Carolina, GM with LG Chem for Ultium cells in Ohio, and Ford with SK On in Kentucky and Tennessee. We'll hear a bit more about the Tennessee factory, co-located with Ford's assembly plant, from one of our panelists who worked on bringing the investment to the state. Part of what has made these types of investments attractive is not only pressure for companies to remain competitive in the midst of the global energy transition, but also significant federal incentives. Legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law offers a lot of support for clean energy technology manufacturing in the form of grants, loan programs, and tax credits, especially if the jobs on which that manufacturing relies stay in the US. And this federal support doesn't just benefit established auto companies and battery manufacturers. Companies recycling battery materials, producing electrode active materials, processing or refining critical minerals, or producing components relevant to auto manufacturing but seeking to reduce the emissions of their facilities are eligible for tax credits, not to mention other potential benefits like favorable loan terms through the U.S. Department of Energy, grants, or expanded R&D credits for novel technologies. As companies, whether large automakers or nascent startups, decide where to invest, there are a lot of factors that states, cities, counties, and economic development organizations consider in making their regions attractive for investment. Factors like property, inventory, sales, and income tax, as well as overall quality of life, education, transportation options, and proximity between facilities like battery factories and automotive assembly plants, all play a role in a company's decision to establish operations in a particular place. Ideally, an investment in the EV supply chain proves mutually beneficial to both industry and the community, offering businesses favorable incentives and a competent workforce while contributing to job growth and economic development in its host community. CICE aims to equip chambers and economic development organizations with the tools to help local businesses and communities maximize the benefits of clean energy. We are therefore using this webinar as a chance to share the economic, job growth, and community upsides of investment in the EV supply chain, lessons learned from successful regional and local efforts to attract those investments, and opportunities for businesses operating along EV supply chains to improve the return on their investment and address challenges they might have with the global transition to electrification. We appreciate you all for joining us today and thank our panelists for taking the time to participate in and promote the event. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. While our panelists are not able to see or hear you, we encourage you to submit questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to address them periodically throughout the event. As this webinar is being recorded, it will be available on our website and YouTube channel after the event. And with that, I would like to introduce our moderator, Steve Zylstra. Steve is the president and CEO of the Arizona Technology Council, a trade association dedicated to advancing the state's technology ecosystem that has engaged on a number of issues related to the promotion of clean energy policy and technology. Steve, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Emily. It's great to be here, and I welcome our audience. Looking forward to this dialogue. I'm going to start by asking all of our panelists to please join me on video. And I'm going to make a brief introduction, ask them to introduce themselves. Let's start with Jay Bellows. He's the president of Core Power. Jay?
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, Jay Bellows, president of Core Power, as Steve said. I've been in the energy storage world for just over 15 years. Core Power is a U.S. battery manufacturer, building systems for the grid, for EVs, and really the focus on bringing domestication of supply chain, both not just bringing companies from elsewhere here, but having U.S.-owned supply chain being here as well. So very happy to be on the panel and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much, Jay. And next, we're going to introduce Mark Herbison. He's the president and CEO of HTL Advantage. Mark?
Thank you, Steve. My name's Mark Herbison. I've been in the economic development world for close to 30 years now. I spent the first half of my career in the Middle Tennessee area and the Nashville area. In 2005, I transitioned over to lead the economic development division in the Greater Memphis Chamber of Commerce. I spent 14 years there, and then in 2019, I became the president and CEO of HTL Advantage. It was a group that was formed back in 2009 when the state of Tennessee was buying the Memphis Regional Mega Site, which is where Ford is locating. 3 counties at that time around the mega site, Haywood, Tipton, and Lauderdale counties, decided to come together and form an economic development coalition to promote the mega site with the goal of landing a car plant. So thank God we were successful at that, and in September of 2021, announced the Ford Blue Oval City project that we'll talk a little bit more about later.
Thank you, Mark. And our final panelist is Marlé Fernandes, and she is General Manager of GGB Americas and Global Product at the Timken Company.
Thanks,
Marlé?
Steve. Thank you for inviting me today, and I look forward to the conversation. So I've been in the industry for about 20 years now. So the Timken Company is a global bearing and power manufacturing transmission company. So we're headquartered in Ohio, and essentially relative to the EV space, we predominantly make bearings, and we've had lots of acquisitions in the ancillary space and power transmission. So we're not only in the EVs, but we're also in the factories that produce the EVs and many other industries that are related to sustainability and other applications around the world.
And I would just mention that all 5 of the EV manufacturers in Arizona are members of the Arizona Technology Council, along with the 4 battery manufacturers here in Arizona. So we're going to start with Mark. Mark, you partner with regional economic development organizations and chambers of commerce to expand existing industry and recruit new industry to the region. Given that EVs will likely dominate the auto industry for the indefinite future, what are some of these organizations' biggest concerns when it comes to the transition from internal combustion engines to EVs, and how are they responding to this?
Well, I think if you understand the history of Tennessee and the automotive industry, it goes back, a long time, back to the early 80s, when Nissan came to the Middle Tennessee area and located a huge facility in Smyrna. And then a few years after that, GM came with the Saturn plant south of Nashville as well, in Columbia, Tennessee. And then about 15 years ago, Volkswagen located a huge facility in Chattanooga. So we have been an automotive state for decades and decades and decades. There are over 1,000 automotive suppliers in Tennessee that support those plants. We have an engine plant in Tennessee, in Winchester, that supports Nissan. And so one of the things that we've been very focused on is meeting with our existing companies, especially in the automotive space, to make sure that they're working toward that transition toward EV. We've got companies that make all kinds of components for internal combustion engines, like hoses and different things. And we've been really working with them to try to help them with that transition over into this new type of vehicle. I would also say that one of the big concerns for us here in Tennessee, and has been the power grid itself. The Ford project is going to use a tremendous amount of electricity. TVA is building they have 7 states that they serve. They're under construction and almost finished now with their largest substation in the entire region. It's a 55-acre substation that will supply the Ford plant. And really, you know, we're looking at electrical capacity in our state. Can we bring more industry in based on the current megawatts of electricity we have available to industry? So really focusing on that electrical infrastructure, making sure that we have the capacity to support both our existing industries and recruit new industries, and then working with our local governments on charging infrastructure. TVA's got some programs. The state of Tennessee has some programs. We have installed some charging stations in some of the more rural areas. TVA has a program where they're going to build a charging station on the interstate system in Tennessee every 50 miles. So we're working on that as well. And I think the other big area is workforce training, making sure that we're prepared with all the skill sets in battery manufacturing and EV, because it's really a new industry. We are actually, for Ford, building a $50 million Tennessee College of Applied Technology at the mega site. We will embed the processes for both the assembly side and the battery production side into that facility, and we'll start training those people for the Ford plant. We have dual enrollment in our school systems here, that if you choose to elect the battery or assembly path in the 9th grade, you can graduate with the credentials needed with no cost to actually get one of those jobs. So that's really kind of the main things we've been focusing on for the last several years.
Excellent, Mark. Thank you. Could you also share your experience working with the Ford Blue Oval City investment, and to the extent possible, some of the processes and considerations around such a major investment?
Sure. I'm going to share an image, Steve. This is the mega site. You can see there on the map, the mega site is located really about halfway in between downtown Jackson and downtown Memphis. This all started 21 years ago. TVA found out that they were getting their brains beat out by other big utilities around the country with these mega projects. We didn't have any big mega sites in their region, and so they did a program back in 2002, a mega site program to identify mega sites around, or potential mega sites around the TVA region. They identified 7 sites in 5 different states. One of those sites was in West Tennessee in Haywood County. Haywood County is a county of 17,000 people, a very rural county. And the state did this because if you look at what's happened in our area over the last 50 years with the transition from, you know, out of the manpower of agriculture into the technology side of agriculture, a farm, a 10,000 acre farm that used to take 400 or 500 people to operate now can be done with 5 or 10 people. So we saw a lot of, you know, people leaving the rural areas and not a lot of job opportunities. So they identified this site in 2002. It took a long time to put it all together, to get the easements. This is 4,100 acres. When Ford chose it, it was the largest site in the country. The state bought the land back in 2009 and 2010. We had a failed sewer project. We were going to build a sewer plant and put it in a neighboring town, and we couldn't get the environmental permits to put it into a certain river. And it took us up until about 2015 to come up with the plan. We are building we've already built a 36-mile pipeline to the Mississippi River, and we are building a sewer plant on site. And so in 2021, in February, Ford came calling. See if I can get this next picture to show. We negotiated from February through September of 2021. The initial part of that negotiation was around the site and the infrastructure. Ford wanted to go back to a concept that Henry Ford had back 100 years ago, to build a very large facility with most of the heavy component manufacturing processes on site, to kind of mirror the River Rouge facility that had been built back starting in 1915 and was built through 1930. And so we worked on the site. We considered the infrastructure. In the summer, we worked on workforce and quality of life. And in September of 2021, they announced that they were going to bring a huge EV assembly plant and battery facility to this site in Haywood County. They took 3,500 acres of a 4,100 acre site, and they started construction in early 22. We are building, the state is building about $750 million worth of new infrastructure to service this site, gas, electric, water, and sewer. So we've got a tremendous amount of activity out there every day with thousands and thousands of construction workers and people getting the facility ready. This is shows the site plan for the facility. You can see on the top side, the assembly side with body stamping paint, batch and hold, all of that. And then the battery plant down at the bottom side of the image. Just the battery and assembly facilities are over 11 million square feet. Where you see those black boxes will be the supplier companies. They just announced that Magna will go in that box just above to the right, top right of the battery plant. And if you see the areas below and above the battery and assembly sides, they have graded and permitted those areas of their site for a potential expansion in the future. So it has been a very exciting thing. They committed to a $6 billion investment in this facility in late 2021. We know it's costing a lot more than that, and they contractually committed to create 6,000 jobs by the end of 2026, and that does not include the supplier company. So we're going to see anywhere starting in 2026 and 27, somewhere between 7,000 to 9,000 people a day working on that site. So it's been a very exciting thing, but it's also uncovered a lot of challenges with infrastructure and other things that we're continuing to try to work with right now.
Thank you, Mark. You might find it interesting that early in my career, I worked at the Rouge as an engineer, so have some experience in those mega facilities. Jay, we're going to move to you next. From your perspective, sort of on the other side of a major investment, what were some of the key factors driving Core Power's decision to build its battery cell factory here in Buckeye, Arizona?
Yeah, I think, I think really, as Mark was talking about, there's a lot that goes into the process, right? So it's going to be infrastructure, it's going to be, the employment capacity, what you can bring in, the localized location. For cell manufacturing too, you have to look at the environment, the weather. Obviously, Arizona is really wonderful. It's nice and dry, helps with the lack of humidity. But really, for us, we chose Buckeye, Arizona, and Buckeye is situated, kind of quite perfectly, actually, in several different zones that are identified for benefits. But besides that, being able to pull from the local employment area coming out of really just the greater Phoenix area gave us the potential to grow with what we're looking for. We're going to have upwards of about 3,000 employees directly, working at the facility, and we're doing cells and modules. So that's a huge piece of it. That's why we chose, Arizona. But going deeper, the electrical supply, Arizona Public Service is a great company. We've worked with them for a really long time. Their capacity there is great. They've been very helpful bringing additional capacity. We're looking for redundancies and resiliencies at the facility. Obviously downtime is going to have a huge impact, and we want to make sure that we mitigate that as best as possible. So when you look at these sites, you have to look at the history of that location. At a FEMA level, you have to look at it at an electrical level. How much downtime is there? What do you need for redundancy and resiliency on the site? We're doing a lot of renewable there as well. So we'll have solar canopies for parking, rooftop solar. We'll have obviously lots of storage, right? That's what we do. So we're going to have storage at the facility as well for redundancies, resiliencies, and other things. And then the other pieces that are really important for cell manufacturing and module manufacturing is the ability to have water and gas there as well. And Arizona really had the trifecta for us. Lots of natural gas delivery, working with the local companies have been amazing. And then water as well. And the city of Buckeye has been very, very wonderful to work with. We've appreciated the whole process. The mayor has been exceptional and, committing to us as we're committing to them as well. So it's going to be substantial for us. We have some upside there as well. We're starting with phase 1, which will be 7 gigawatt hours of production. That'll be done by the end of 2025. And then we're going to move into phase 2, which is an additional 10, as it looks like right now. We may be able to do, a little bit more, just depending on how things change between now and then. But that most likely will be coming online at the end of 26, or the beginning of 27. And a lot of what we're building right now foundationally is to build and support for both phase 1 and phase 2, as you can imagine, especially at the sub-deliverable level. But beyond that, we'll be continuing to grow out that site. So we're really excited for the location, and finding good partners in the process in anything in life is really important. And the city of Buckeye has been amazing for us right now. And we work with the state government as well, and it's been very, very clear, I think from the beginning, that the state of Arizona is behind this and pushing for this type of manufacturing to be in place. I think our whole world here, the whole technology world, is spinning a little bit, right? Batteries, EVs, ESS, all of it's becoming more and more important. I think batteries are kind of quickly becoming the holy grail in everything that we're trying to do as we electrify our world here. And when you look at the electrical infrastructure in place, as we talk about EVs, you have to go way upstream to see, what other pieces or components are going to be really important to this. And we can have as many EVs as we want. If we can't charge them, that's a problem, right? So the electrical infrastructure across the country needs a lot of support as we bring 300 million internal combustion engines as registered today in the US that generate their own electricity onto the grid to become consumers. And that's a process. So we have to look at all of that as a key component in this. And we're focused, Core, we're really focused on the entirety of that process, right? So whether our batteries are going into EVs or our batteries are going into full energy storage systems that we're providing to the grid, it's all part of the process of being a key component in the electrification of what we're trying to do here in the States. And then on top of that, Core's been in the energy storage world for a really long time. In fact, the company that we merged with 2 years ago, called Northern Reliability, is actually the oldest energy storage company in the world. It's been building systems for about 54 years now. And there are systems everywhere: Antarctica, the North Pole, oil rigs, mountaintops, anywhere you can think of. The kind of the growth curve in energy storage has been really pushed forward very quickly with the IRA, right? So now that we have the IRA there, it's identified the needs that are required to get us to the point where we're not dependent on companies from other countries, right? Especially countries of concern. So for us, that's a key piece in this, is we want to domesticate as much of this process as we can, so that we don't become reliant on other countries and their deliverables as well. So really focus on having a domestic supply chain and bringing product, from the US for the US to use. So for us, the perfect location ultimately was Arizona, and we're very, very excited to hang our shingles there and continue to grow out.
Yeah, a couple other characteristics of Arizona I would mention is a great business climate, low tax and light regulatory environment, high quality of life, great standard of living, and low cost of living, and available land, as you found.
For sure. Well, Steve, I'd also add on top of that, the colleges and educational institutions are exceptional. We're working with Arizona State University, a lot of the community colleges as well, establishing curriculum to try to get people, interested and trained in energy storage. And I think as we look across the country, we're seeing jobs disappear in the coal realm, right? Mining as a whole, obviously oil and gas are starting to deteriorate. So where are those really skilled workers going to go, right? And I hope that renewables and batteries are the destination for them and for those emerging into those fields as well. So the educational institutions in Arizona are exceptional, and we're working with all of them to help kind of guide people towards our world a little bit.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Marlé, Timken is headquartered in Ohio, but it's really a global company. How has the energy transition in general and trends toward EVs and electrification affected Timken's business? And are there any lessons learned from different regional contexts, which when it comes to preserving existing jobs and skill sets in light of that transition?
Yeah, thank you. So just for some context, so Timken is over 120 years old. It's a US company. We've been trading on the stock exchange for 100 years now. So we're 20,000 people strong roughly, and we're in 46 countries. So we have a very large global manufacturing footprint. But as you said, we're headquartered in Ohio. So certainly for us, I mean, just put, publicly traded company in my mind, it's important for us to pay attention to what are the emerging trends. So definitely, as you mentioned, electrification, EVs, the whole sustainability and how renewable energy is changing the energy transition landscape has been very important for us. So in general, it's been a very positive change. Actually, renewable energy is one of our largest front end markets now, just because it's been such a highly innovative space, and there's so much opportunity for, bearing companies and power transmission companies like ourselves that really lead with our value and our technical solutions to deliver the right solutions to the marketplace. And then if I think about your question from the global context, what's really actually an opportunity for us is, as we're a global company, we can kind of see different trends take off in different regions of the world. So as both Mark and Jay have already explained, there's a lot of very local factors that dictate the timing with which these trends take off around the world, right? So we have the opportunity as a global company to kind of see that take off at different phases around the world, right? So we can see what works well. We can learn how to innovate our product, how to change our supply chains, and how to really work alongside customers in different markets where different drivers are more important at different points in the space of time. And learn from it and then apply best practices going forward, right? So definitely one of the elements here is timing, right? And I think we've certainly all alluded to it a little bit, right? Is these things, they take off and then they slow down a little bit again. And certainly some of the IRA injection is helpful to that on a local level. But I think from a technology perspective, where it's really where mostly I come from, is the technology solutions, they apply everywhere in the world, right? And we can see, so in Europe, as an example, fleets have become very important, right? So electric fleets, along with many of the other decarbonization solutions, have taken off maybe more so than in other areas, whereas in some of the East, you can see EVs have taken off very fast, but actually some of the trends that are, driving higher are things like autonomy of vehicles, right? Which creates a whole new different set of, technical aspects for us to take care of. So it's very beneficial. And I think then at the end of the day, to bring those innovations and those lessons learned back locally, right? And to apply them not just as a company so that you're a stronger company and that ultimately those economic benefits come back in locally to, the communities that we're headquartered in and where we manufacture in, but also then the actual technical solution can apply globally.
Very good. Thank you very much. This next question is really for Marlé and Jay. We'll start with you, Jay. What are some of the biggest challenges you face as suppliers to automotive manufacturers in the midst of this energy transition? And can you speak a bit to the regional divide we're seeing between legacy automakers in the Midwest and Southeast and EV startups in the West? And what are some of the biggest differences in terms of company culture, job opportunities, adaptability, and so on?
So that's a big question, Steve. So let me partition that out just a little bit. So first, I think for any emerging EV company, there's a lot to overcome, right? So out of the gate, you're competing with companies that have been around for a really long time, producing vehicles, right? Successfully, most likely, right? For a really long time. So as you emerge as a company, you have to find, all of the things that we do, looking for battery plants, right? Same thing for automobiles. You have a significant supply chain, much larger, right? At the component level. And then the ability to have to bring it all together, establish a name, market, get it out into the world. And I think one of the hurdles for all of the entire EV world is the cost, right? I think we've all seen the cost of EVs are high. It's very hard to get that market share right now. I think we've overcome the cool factor, which is great, right? EVs are attractive and fast and they perform well. So that part's great. I think it's really just getting the price so it's competitive for the average American. I think that's a huge piece. And that's very difficult to do as an emerging company because you're not buying components at a high level yet, right? You're still ramping. So when you're a huge company and you're buying lots of components, you're getting an economy of scale. When you're an emerging company, you can't commit to economy of scale yet because you don't know how well your product's going to be received, and it's a huge process. And from the battery standpoint, you know, there's a long runway to get your battery or pack into an automobile, right? That literally the car gets designed around the pack. You know, the pack design works with the whole process of getting the EV engineered. So it's just it's a big process, Steve. I think that's one thing I think that we have to look at as, you know, the emerging EVs in the world. I mean, look how long it took Tesla to become, you know, ultimately Tesla, right? It's a huge process. So there's a lot of that. I think that the emerging companies are going to be a key component in this process of kind of, you know, getting EVs to the point that we want them by 2035, right? So I think that is gonna be important. But I think as you look at the emergence of these upstart companies, it's a process. We've seen a lot of them, you know, quite frankly, come to us for batteries, work with them, and then unfortunately they just don't make it through the, you know, the emergence process. And you know, the startup mindset, the startup process is a difficult one to begin with, and then doing it in the EV market can be really tough. So that was the first part of your question. You know, as we look at the rest of it, I just with EVs as well, we have I think there's significant hurdles to overcome too, and a lot of that's just mindset. We talked about charging earlier, how important EV charging is. The average American thinks that, you know, they can travel across the country in a couple of days. They don't really need to worry about charging. They can stop at a gas station and fill up with their you know, internal combustion engine. So, you know, the mindset of charging is going to grow significantly, going into fast charging and how we do that. And then on the other side of things is it's advancing battery technology. It's going to allow for elongated travel and quicker charging time too. So both of those come into play as we look at kind of the emergence of EVs and whether, you know, we're looking towards the up and coming companies or the companies that are in existence. So, and if you wouldn't mind, Steve, what was the other parts of that question? I kind of went off on that one a little bit.
Well, what are some of the biggest differences between sort of the legacy industry and these new industries in terms of company culture, adaptability, job opportunities, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think, well, it's very difficult to compare, you know, like Ford, for example. Mark's talking about, you know, their huge facility that they're building down there with 6,000 employees, to say an emerging, you know, EV company that's got 42 right now, and will hopefully grow to Ford that's been around for 100+ years, right? So you know, it's an undertaking. The culture usually at the emerging companies is going to be really aggressive. You know, they're raising capital. They're working very hard to differentiate themselves from those kind of OEM EV companies that have been out there for a long time. The cultures can be tough. I know a lot of people in our industry have gone from one to another to another to another, just because they haven't survived. Not the people, of course, but the programs and the projects, and sometimes the companies. So you know, the culture can be a little bit more kind of fast and furious, and oftentimes emerging new technologies can come from that, which is great. But also, you know, a lot of times you find stress technology that didn't work. You know, it just didn't take, and those companies didn't move forward. I think the larger OEMs can survive those types of things, obviously, and the emerging companies just struggle with that. So the companies that are up and coming have to have solid backers that are going to really allow them to go through those growth stages and make it to a product that gets to market, and then hopefully productize that quickly, right? Because there's a difference getting a product to market and then productizing it, right? Because you're looking at getting a lot of that product into the market and then growing and having more than 1, 2, 3, and 4 products as well. So it's a long life cycle, or growth cycle rather, to get to the point where, you know, you're in that bigger EV, you know, company. So I think it's pretty significant cultural differences between the two, for sure.
Thank you, Jay. Marlé, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, some of the additional comments, right? So I think some of the deltas between them definitely is speed to market, right? So certainly with some of the startup companies, we see the need to be agile as a supplier to them, right? And recognize where they're at and how to support them in their sort of learning path. But that's not truly and honestly, that's not very unique in our industry. We have some customers that are more sensitive to speed to market, and we have some customers that are not, and you manage that. But I think there's also, as much as there's a lot of differences, and agree with those that Jay has pointed out, I think there's also a lot of similarities, right? I mean, at the end of the day, from a technical vantage point, I mean, they're trying to solve the same problems in many ways, right? And I think the whole conversation around range anxiety and has certainly been a real concern in the EV space. And for all the components that go into an EV, it's been incumbent on us to try and help our customers engineer and optimize to overcome those challenges, right? So I think the neat thing when you think about that is, you know, if you kind of go back decades to the CAFE standards, right, it was all about increasing efficiency of the vehicles. And much of that fundamental technology in terms of how to be more efficient, particularly in our space from a bearing perspective, those fundamentals still stand, even if you're now working on an EV, right? So you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You respect what's come before you and you learn from it. And you continue to support your customers to innovate the product that's going to meet the new challenging demands, right? And ultimately get us to the range, you know, that we need by creating space in the vehicles that are still durable for the battery packs to fit in. So lots of differences, but I think it's a common goal at the end of the day that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Marlé. We do have a question from the audience that I'm going to pose to all the panelists. What are the best strategies to promote EVs to underserved and low-income communities? Thoughts on that?
I would say cost is a big factor, like Jay said earlier. I mean, you know, F-150 Lightning is very expensive. So that, and then just the range anxiety as well. So.
And I think that if you look at some of the studies, right, there's been some work that's shown that, you know, from a fleet perspective, which is maybe not specifically low income, but over the duration of a vehicle, some of the cost benefits are actually already there for EVs, which may not always be there when you look at the sticker tag, right, and you see some of the sort of near-term concerns. But if we can help promote some of those sort of fundamental truths back into, you know, over the life cycle of a vehicle, if this is actually going to cost you less, then it actually becomes more, there's a greater appetite, right, even for lower income serving communities.
I would add to that the Inflation Reduction Act has this component called Justice 40, which means that 40% of the $369 billion that's going to be invested in EVs and clean energy must go to the benefit of low-income, underserved, and rural areas. So there's going to be a lot of incentive for that, and that includes charging stations, right? There's going to have to be the infrastructure in the rural areas especially as well. So Mark, as some of the companies and localities face some of these challenges associated with energy transition, what message do you have for local economic development organizations and chambers of commerce to ensure that they benefit from the transition to EVs, as well as state and federal incentives for domestic manufacturing?
Well, you know, one of the things that economic developers do is try to help companies with incentives. And so I would say that, you know, really, Jay said it earlier, relationships are very important, building strong partnerships with your local government and your existing industries, and communicating those incentives to those companies. You know, there's even agricultural incentives that we're trying to promote around. There's R&D tax credits. There's any company that's bringing in energy efficiency. So we're trying to educate those companies on that. I think even a bigger deal for us, other than incentives, is just workforce development, Steve. As you know, and everybody on the panel knows, when I started in economic development 30 years ago, workforce was really not a concern to a company about where they located. Now it's 1, 2, 3, and 4 top concerns of where they locate, being able to, you know, get a quality workforce. And so Ford, I have to give them a lot of credit, and I shame some of our existing companies because Ford hit the ground here in 2022. They've probably got about 50 people in the region right now, and all they do is workforce development. They're at every chamber banquet, they're at every homecoming parade, they're at every public meeting. And I always say anytime 2 or more people are gathered together, there's somebody from Ford there in West Tennessee. They're working with every school system. They've developed a high school curriculum and a TCAT curriculum for people to be able to work in their facilities. And so one of the messages that I'm pushing out to our existing companies, you have to be more like Ford. We have companies that have not been engaged in the community. They're not affiliated with the school system. They don't really get engaged with their local areas. And so we're working with our big companies within, our area to get more involved, get people on the ground, get involved with the school systems, and really take advantage of federal incentives that aren't part of the, the Reduction Act on the job training, incumbent worker training, and things like that, because really being able to prove that you have the ability to provide a quality workforce is the most important thing you have to do to be able to land something like this.
Right. Thank you, Mark. So, of course, the Biden administration has taken some unprecedented action to support domestic manufacturing along the entire EV supply chain through tax credits, grants, loan programs like the one Core Power has taken advantage, through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. How can these entities, especially local businesses and startups and small communities, leverage some of these incentives so they're not left behind? And whoever wants to go first on that, this is for the whole panel.
I can start. I mean, as a recipient of an award from that one of those programs, certainly it's a process, right? I think that's one of the things that there's a lot of opportunity, and you have to do your research. So for local entities looking to get involved in that, I think the research is where it all begins. What are you looking to do? And where are the associated programs with that? There is a lot of help out there to get you to that point, but that's a big step, is the research and finding people that can help in the process. The IRA, and quite frankly every legislative piece of program is difficult, right? There's a lot of pieces to it, a lot to understand, and you have to learn how to navigate those waters. It can be lengthy process for sure. So I think just identifying what they're looking for and what they're trying to achieve, narrowing down the process, right? Like if you're just looking to do EV charging, narrow down that process. Don't get involved in all the other things that maybe have an opportunity. Find the ones that directly do, and then move forward with those. I think that's a big piece. And be prepared. Really be prepared. You have to show exactly what you're doing, how you're going to do it, why you're going to do it, and who you're going to do it with. And rightfully so. This is our government assigning a lot of capital to companies, right? So they're going to do their due diligence to make sure that everything is accurate and on the up and up. So for those local entities looking to become a part of this, first, it's incredibly important. So please do. And then second, just be prepared, because it can be a process. Find the right partners and find the right route to information, because that's going to be very important. You don't want to be 2/3 of the way through a process and find out that it may not have applied to you or what your ultimate goal is.
And just
Steve, I see it as the economic developer, Chamber of Commerce's role to really be the entity that holds that industry's hand through all these processes. We found with some of the workforce training grants that we've got executives at these companies that are busy, and these things are difficult to go through, the application process and all those things. So we see that as our role, to go hold their hand, educate them on these various opportunities that are out there for them. If we have to, sit down and fill out the applications for them, but really be their partner, because they're busy doing other things, and it's really an exhaustive process to be able to get some of these loans and grants and incentives. So really, I see that as our role, to be that interface that assists with those types of things.
Marlé, anything to add there?
Yeah, I just say, I mean, it's certainly complicated and it's not a simple process, but right now there's definitely a lot of resources out there. And I think to Jay's comment, right, it's like, if you can be specific, like, what am I trying to achieve? So go do a couple of very specific searches around EV, and then try and understand, in my area, do I qualify for an energy community credit, etc., right? And kind of narrow your way down to understand what dollars at the end of the day are available for me and my community or my business in a certain area, and what can I try and tap, right? So it's certainly complex, but I think more than ever now, the money is available and there are resources online. There's a couple of websites where people are actively, you know, putting all the information in one place to try and make it as easy as possible for consumers and for users. So I would encourage you to have a look and don't operate from a perspective of this is an expensive technology and this won't pay for itself, because I think a lot of that has changed with the IRA.
So just a point about what Arizona has done. Our governor just started her second year in a 4-year term this year. So she was elected after the IRA and the IIJA. And one of the first things she did was to create an Office of Resiliency, which focuses on energy, water, and land use. So it's Arizona's equivalent to energy offices that other states. And they are intimately involved in every aspect of taking full advantage of IIJ and IRA here in Arizona, and working with local companies and economic developers to help facilitate that. So again, this is for all the panelists. A big concern with the transition to EVs is that fewer parts are needed to build EVs, jobs are lower paying or in less demand, and different skill sets like tech, software are required for EV versus traditional ICE engines and vehicles. As representatives of companies and organizations at the intersection of EV supply chain growth and economic development, how do you respond to these concerns? Maybe we start with Marlé on that.
I mean, I think I kind of alluded to some of my answer earlier when I spoke about some of the technology trends that are similar, right? And I think that, I mean, it's incumbent on us to recognize what is no longer going to be there. You know, so certain parts of the engine, for example, you know, certainly we recognize are not going to be there. But I mean, cars still have body parts, they still have chassis. You know, there's an entire new industry that's starting, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity in the industry, and I think that, you know, skill sets changing from one kind to another, you have a choice how you look at it, right? And I think there's certainly an opportunity to have increased skilled labor. So I personally am more on the optimistic side as I look at these things and try and see where we can, you know, take hold of the opportunity. And how, you know, I mean, you can work with, and someone's already mentioned it already on the call here, but like partner with your local community colleges, et cetera, to try and understand how to, you know, what are the skill sets that are needed to support the industry that's around us, right? A lot of it is not going away. So if more than ever, actually now there's incentives on the table to attract it, right, and keep it local. So how can we partner around those and rally around those?
Mark, Jay?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, you know, making sure that you're interfacing with your existing companies. We have a lot of automotive suppliers in the region, and really having that conversation about this transition and seeing what they're doing, if they're doing anything. And a lot of our companies are. They're looking at new products for batteries and things like that. So, and then workforce is a big deal. For us, not as much, because we don't have an automobile assembly plant. You know, the high-paying jobs are really not in the rural communities. So we're kind of excited to be able to have additional workforce coming toward the area. But just again, making sure that you have those programs embedded into your training facilities around electric vehicles and battery production and things like that.
Yeah, and I'll kind of jump in on what Mark said too. I think one of the things that we have to really be cognizant of is that the programs that are existing in especially in the educational facilities are almost always based on geography, right? So where historically automobiles have been manufactured, there's a lot of automobile manufacturing education, right? So I think kind of expanding on curriculum is going to be a big part of that. And I think one of the great things that we're seeing because of the IRA and because of all the programs that are in existence right now is we're seeing growth in areas that I don't think we would have expected growth, whether for political reason or otherwise. If you look in, you know, in my industry, in the battery industry, there's a ton of battery manufacturing, you know, from Ohio to, you know, down through Kentucky, West Virginia, like that whole belt, which was once the coal belt, is very quickly turning into the battery belt, right? So I think, you know, we're seeing the expansion, and a lot of that, to Mark's points, are you know, really it's at the state level, they're opening their doors and welcoming this industry in, right, for the goal of jobs. And That's going to be a big part of this, right? Who's going to welcome the most, quite frankly, right? Whether that's financial or otherwise, that's the type of thing that's really necessary. And then working with the programs that are in existence. And, what Marlé said about just in automobiles, whether EV or otherwise, there's a lot of parts. There's going to be a lot of components. There's still a lot of growth in this industry. And I mean, honestly, this is the tip of the iceberg in the EV world, right? Where I don't remember the latest numbers, 2% acceptance rate. I don't even know that it's that. So we're looking at significant growth. The vehicles are going to change. There's going to be a lot of opportunity in that realm for sure.
Just another comment about what Arizona's done. For instance, when Lucid Motors decided to set up its manufacturing facilities here in Arizona, the Central Arizona College set up a simulated assembly line within the college to train the workers for that organization, and they trained the first 600 employees that went to work for Lucid on the assembly line. And at the Tech Council, we work very closely with the community colleges, all the state universities, and so on. And I've noted that both the community colleges and ASU especially have all kinds of battery offerings now, which there were none of before the battery industry started showing up here. And Mark, you made those comments earlier about how critical workforce is. And so I think, whether it's training or retraining, I think our academic institutions are standing up to do what they need to do to retrain and train the future workforce. So a question for Jay and Marlé. As companies operating along the EV supply chain, how do you support job growth, skills development, and local economic development in the specific communities in which you operate?
Well, Marlé, want me to jump in?
Yeah.
I'll go. Okay. So, I mean, I think we've kind of talked about this. For us, it's been, we're at every event, right? I think, early on, Mark was talking about how Ford goes to all the events. Core is at every event possible, right? We have representation everywhere. So we want to get the word out that we're coming, we're building this facility. We're going to be hiring a lot of people. We want people to understand that these are careers. This isn't like a job. We're looking to employ families if we can, right? We want this to be the best place to work possible, and we're committed to that. So we go to all the events. We're involved with all of the educational facilities, as I talked about earlier, working on curriculum, working on ways to help kind of drive the growth in this industry. So really, that's the biggest piece, is that a lot of community connection is how we're doing it. And I think that's the most important, because you're starting at the foundation and growing up.
Yeah, so for Jay's comments, I mean, I think you want to be present in your community. You want to be a good corporate citizen, right? At the end of the day, I mean, if you're going to be a large employer in the area, you want to make a positive impact, and you want people to understand that, because that they're benefiting because they're employed and it's a career, it's not just a job, and it's not something that's fleeting. But I think it also starts with investing back into the school, so that where does STEM technology start? It starts when middle school kids get interested in joining those careers, right? How do communities flourish? Is because there's actually employments in the area. How do community colleges stay vibrant? Is because they know that they have employees that are partnering with them, that are at the end of the day employing the people that are getting the associate's degrees or whatever it might be. So I think you got to be involved in your community. You got to understand what matters where you are, close to where you are, right? And that differs depending on which area you're in, and try and meet the need where it's at.
I'll just mention too that Core Power is a member of the Arizona Tech Council, and we have an e-mobility and clean energy committee, which they actively participate in. We do an annual e-mobility and clean energy conference, which they're typically a speaker at. So as Jay mentioned, they're involved in everything. So we appreciate that. I don't see any other questions from the audience. I do see a comment to the earlier question from the audience on what are the best strategies to promote EVs to underserved and low-income communities. Berenice said, I think marketing could be more representative, e.g., using ads with BIPOC community members driving EVs, which is a very good point.
Mhm.
So we only have about 3 minutes left. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to sort of round this out with any final comments, anything we didn't cover, anything more we should know about your enterprise. So each of you have up to 1 minute. And why don't we start with Mark?
Well, I would say, Steve, and I think Marley said it really well, that, you know, you've got to really focus on the workforce for this. You've got to invest in the local communities. You know, it's been a long road for us to get where we are in regards to that. But I do think it's for my chamber folks and all that out there, really be out working with your existing industries. We've said ever since Ford landed, Ford's going to be fine. They're going to get all the employees they need. They're going to pay the best in the region. So we're really focused right now on existing companies to help them get ready for this, what's going to happen next year, the middle of next year. So really just focusing on that workforce development and helping your existing industries.
Very good. And Marley?
I would just say certainly, I mean, electrification remains a global economic trend, right? It's going to keep coming. So I think let's embrace it and let's make it successful and let's be part of it in our local communities and in our US manufacturing as much as we can.
Thank you. Jay?
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of second what Marley just said. I think electrification certainly is coming, is here. And there's a lot of change that has to come with that. And I think we need to go, like I talked about earlier, just need to go really upstream and identify, right? At the utility level, for example, this is a significant undertaking, right? We have only a certain amount of capacity today, and we're talking about more than doubling the demand, right? So, you know, at the utility level in particular, this is going to be huge. And so, you know, understand that for installs, for upgrades, all of that takes time, effort, and capital. So, this is a process that everybody has to come together on to make succeed, and you know, just be open-minded to that and be prepared.
Well, I want to thank our panelists for an extraordinary discussion today. Really appreciate your time and attention. You're all busy people, and we appreciate you being here today. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Emily.
Thank you to everyone in the audience for your participation. Thank you especially to our moderator and panelists, Steve Zylstra, Jay Bellows, Marlé Fernandes, and Mark Herbison, as well as my teammates at CICE, especially Ann Feldhusen, Michaela Rodriguez, and Greg Roth for supporting. As a reminder, this event will be available as a recording on our website and YouTube channel within coming days. Keep an eye out on our website for upcoming events, our Chambers in Action series, and a variety of policy briefs and analysis. We actually have a policy brief series right now on key IRA tax credits, including those for new, used, and commercial EVs, as well as EV charging infrastructure. We also encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find on our website at chambersforinnovation.com/connect. And also check out the resources available through the Arizona Technology Council, which has been a great partner and resource for us in our work. We hope you all found this webinar useful, and we look forward to seeing you at future in-person and virtual events.